the Overman Warrior Podcast.
Let's get started.
Oh, that's real good.
The goddess Artemis favors the devoted. We serve her with joy. Blessings upon the temple.
The sacred flames rise.
You've got to get a hold of yourself.
Hi, Dr. Choffin here. Really proud that NASA is going back to the moon. I'm really not crazy about the Artemis name. I didn't like it when they came up with it. I know it was kind of a secular thing to make everybody happy name. Who doesn't want to revere some neutral gods like Apollo or his sister Artemis? The temple to Artemis in Ephesus was one of the seven wonders of the world. So when you refer to biblical text and the preaching at the seven churches and the kind of evils that were chronicled, the dismissive nature from secular type of people is to essentially discredit Christian writers for what they reported when they taught in the Mediterranean area and the kind of cultures that existed worshiping fertility and the sex rituals that often did occur at these temples. And it doesn't matter whether it was Artemis or Ishtar, the goddesses, the standard behavior was diabolical and what we would call evil, because it robs individual sanctity with collective appeasement. And yes, I will have a lot to say about this as we move forward into the future. I'm actually writing an entire book about this kind of thing called The Politics of Heaven that will be out sometime soon. It still has quite a lengthy editorial and publishing effort that has to go into it, but the book is pretty much written. But the exploration of how evil works among the human race is kind of what we're talking about here. And you have a secular point of view that wants to separate human entanglement from spirit world relationships. And I think you can't do that at all, because I think we're one and the same, and the body ends up being a vehicle for which the soul travels, and there's lots of competing souls. There's not enough bodies to hold all the competing souls, and there's always those who mismanage their bodies and allow a backdoor entry for some sort of spiritual entity to climb into them. They certainly do, and they start driving the car. And you see that in personalities, whether it's split personality disorders or sanity fluctuations, where competing elements climb into your mind and make people behave in weird ways. I think this long standard of appeasing the gods with sex worship is a long-standing concession that has its roots in cultures like the worship of Artemis. Large temple built magnificently in that region of the world, and you can't ignore the fact of what it was. Now, to name the Artemis program, NASA, of course, has occult origins. The Jack Parsons, L. Ron Hubbard days, the beginnings of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But with all that known, I still love NASA. I want NASA to do well. I want space exploration to do well. And, after the Obama years, there were a lot of people brought in from all kinds of different cultures. There was a period where NASA was told to study Islamic contributions to science. So you got a lot of people, and pick on what they think is a non-secular name, an ancient pagan goddess, that everybody can agree, hey, it sounds like a cool name. Do we want to name it Artemis, or we want to name it Mother Mary, a rocket after Christian roots? Because then you're going to segregate all those people who aren't Christian, the Hindus out there, and the Muslims, and whoever else. So I'm sure that the name Artemis came because they considered it neutral in a long dead culture that's long fallen away from human care. It's now on the safe chronicles of history from the point of view of those who came up with the Artemis name. Who would want to name their rocket program, go out back to the moon, after the moon goddess and the sister of Apollo, of a culture that's had its day and is now receded into history? I think the problem with all those feminine-oriented cultures, especially in Greek society, you certainly saw it in Phoenicia, the Canaanites, the worship of Baal, Mesopotamian cultures, Moloch, they all had this idea of sacrifice. You had to sacrifice some sort of human essence to these gods, these hungry gods that loved appeasement from their human counterparts. So at these temple rituals, it was common, it was as recorded through history. When they say archaeologists haven't found anything, or they haven't found any corresponding data, that's usually because they haven't looked, or the evidence was damaged along the way, or the layers of the earth that they're looking in hasn't been properly excavated. You have archaeology in those regions, but it's under hostile conditions. The digging seasons aren't very long, so it's not surprising that you wouldn't find a lot of corresponding temple texts, because the temples are pretty much gone and destroyed. The great temple of Artemis in Ephesus is just a few pillars and some stones. You'd really have to excavate the area extensively to find anything that might lead to the kind of sex practices that were common, reportedly common, in all the temples that were dedicated to fertility, especially in the land of Canaan. We know that the dedications to Ishtar were quite extensive, and that it was commonly reported that they had women had an obligation to spend time as a temple prostitute and be paid money for sexual relationships where people could come and interact with her, and that was an expectation of women in the culture. All women had to do a tour of duty through the temple, whether it was Artemis or Ishtar or somebody else, and that they would then dedicate that money to the church or through the temple, and that was a way to raise money, and then that was their way to sacrifice themselves to the effort of fertility, and that it wasn't something that was segregated to an individual designation to marriage, but to society as a whole. So we have Christian reportings that secular analysis says is not relevant because it's skewed towards the Christian perspective. My argument would be that the Christian perspective evolved out of a disgust of that, yielding to that culture, and that any skewing that occurred was outrage that necessitated change politically on the frontiers of the Near East, and evolving thought from pagan rituals that extended 10 to 20,000 years in the past and were being rebelled against by the Christian movement. And it wasn't the Christians that were victims to all this. They were the ones who were overtaking the previous culture and forcing it to change. And that's the sex cults in these temples. And so what's the continuity from then to now that we can make such a statement? I would say go to any nightclub. If you've been to a nightclub, most people have at some point in their life, that would not be unlike the prostitute behavior that women were expected to undergo at these temples. We might look back and say that's outrageous, but we send many of our young women, we encourage them actually to go to nightclubs, what we call meat markets, and from 18 to 21 to 24 years old before they're embedded in some sort of serious relationship that is going to take them towards the production of children in a marriage. We actually encourage our young women to go through the similar process. We see it at bachelorette parties where sexual impropriety is encouraged. Not to talk about the male rights, which I think are just equally disgusting. But if we're talking about, if you're doing scientific analysis on the period of sex worship in temples dedicated to fertility goddesses all around the world, but particularly in the Near East, and specifically the Temple of Artemis, you can believe what has been said through Christian reportings of the time because you can see the behavior of the day. And I would say it's the same spiritual appeasement. It's the same vacant personalities, abandoning their bodies through drunkenness, so that the conscious mind loses its tethering to its vehicle, the body, and then what emerges in there are these competing spirits, the same spirits that existed back in the Temple of Artemis period, the Near East, 1000, 2000 BC, and the same spirits want appeasement. They want to relish in the debauchery of the human race, and they certainly want to deface the human being, God's creation. And if they can get a hold of the human body, it's an act of vandalism on their part, I think. And a lot of people are not happy to think about the spirit world being so much a part of everyday life, but I think it's quite prevalent. And you visit you visit those characters in dream states all the time, and most of those interactions aren't remembered because they're so shocking that our conscious minds don't record them in a way that affects our daily lives. Every now and then we might remember them as a nightmare or a lucid dream of some kind, but most of those experiences aren't remembered consciously because they so much differ from everyday life. These are the kinds of forces that ancient people were trying to appease through some sort of ritual, and the sacrifice of virginity or vitality, spirit, youth. We do the same thing now. We look at our young women as being weird if they didn't go to the meat market and let people grind up against them in disgusting ways and treat them as immoral vessels of pagan yearnings for sexual delight. We actually expect our young people, our young females, to do just that, to sow their wild oats and get it out of their system before they can then settle down and produce a family. And in secular radicalism in the progressive movement, with women's rights, they want to abandon any kind of integrity at all and throw it all out the window. So you can easily look back and say, are the Christian writings of early goddess worship truthful, and is the evidence just waiting for us to dig it up and find it in a depleted state many thousand years later, when many feet of soil is probably still confining a lot of the secrets of that period? What we do have are observations from Christian writers who observed the situation at the time and reported the immoral findings in ways that we can trust through the hands-on reporting. And when you say that, I go to Ephesians 6:12 and the principalities and the observations of what they observed. What they saw was so grotesquely evil in perspective to this new Christian movement, this new way of looking at sacrifice and appeasement of the spirit world. We see, even if it's an anger towards that mentality, it's still a line in the sand of a conscious decision to not participate in those types of activities. Just as we would say today, we shouldn't send our young females to meat market nightclubs to have them dressed in scandalous ways and to present themselves in bad behavior they'll never get over the rest of their lives, and to allow all these evil entities to have their way with their innocent bodies. These young people who were just children playing with Legos a few years ago, and now they're in a meat market nightclub dancing to some throbbing music, all sweaty and in states of undress, being molested by other human beings for the appeasement of some diabolical characters of the spirit world who inhabit drunken bodies. And so you can't look at those cultures and say that it didn't happen, because it's still happening. And that's why I think it's a bad decision for the American culture, for NASA to name anything after the goddess Artemis, after any pagan gods from any previous era, even if it sounds like a cool name and people think that that's ancient history. It's not so ancient. It's still the behavior persists in our culture now, and it's something that human beings are required to overcome for their own perpetual intellect. But yielding to the animalistic natures of demons, spirits, kami, jinn, would name your evil entity or your disembodied spirit. It's ghost-like apparition that exists in multidimensional reality, entangled through quantum physics, our terrestrial lives, and their yearnings for sexual practices that they then find easy to live through the human experience when humans choose to impair their minds in ways they can't defend against those elements. And you still see the social expectation to appease those characters so they don't haunt you in your dreams by sacrificing young people, our daughters, our young women, and males behaving horribly to play their role in the whole thing. And hope that by this kind of social appeasement, the pressures we fear in our nightmares might alleviate us from the harm we perceive is just outside our lived experience. So yeah, I believe that the Temple of Artemis and the many sex culture fertility rites that existed all up and down the Mediterranean Sea, from Greece to Spain to the Near East, even over in Egypt, that sex rites were a common practice, and the social expectation was to appease those evil entities in some way or another, to appease them so that they wouldn't haunt society at large through the rest of everybody's lives, and that there's almost a nonverbal agreement that will sacrifice our youth to those sinister forces in hopes of the relief that comes from that agreement. And that's why I think it's a bad idea to name the rocket program at NASA after Artemis. I think you should pick a I think if you're a Western culture and one rooted in biblical ideology, you pick a nice character from the Bible and stick with that. And I think that would be an appropriate statement. We don't have to make the world feel like we had to pick a neutral narrative to bring everybody along. It's okay to pick something from your culture that means something to you and invite everybody to get on with it. But the typical cults of fertility goddesses in the region, observed by Christian writers who were appalled by what they witnessed, we have to go by their reports because we can still verify that behavior is persistent even to this very day in the nightclub cultures that we see. We just dressed it up differently. You didn't have the wild music and the lights, the Saturday Night Fever vibes of a night on the town with your little mini skirts that barely cover your hips and dancing on raised platforms so everybody can see what you have. And that embarrassing presentation of your physical human body is actually a sacrifice to these evil entities that are always looming in the background, and that we don't trust that we have a mechanism to defeat them, so we appease them. And so I think that's why any kind of reverence to the pagan cults of the Mediterranean region is a bad idea, and we shouldn't have named the Artemis program the Artemis program. We shouldn't be worshiping Jupiter or Apollo or Mars or any of them, because there's a lot we're going to uncover in the years to come as we move into space, that we're going to find out that our origin mythologies and a lot of these names came from other places, from other peoples that probably didn't deserve the kind of recognition they're getting. And it's a mistake to revere them even in name. But history will prove that to be true as we continue to dig and uncover a lot of this stuff. But what we do have now are the reports of Christian writers from the period, and we have observed conditions even to this day of the same behavior occurring. You just change the temple for the nightclub and you have essentially the same behavior. Young women going through their tour of duty to offer themselves as a temple prostitute. They have to give themselves over to the elements of society in a sexual union that is not individually picked to a sacred husband or a sacred family that they build as individuals. The sacrifice of the body to the collective whole is what we're talking about, and it's very much still a common practice, and it's disgusting. And it's not the thing that makes you the most popular person in the world to say, but it's something that everybody has to wrestle with in their own way and change behavior if you want to have a sustainable culture going in the future. So if you want to name a program to go to back to the moon and talk about sustaining human life to outlive the Earth go well into the future, Artemis probably isn't the best name to come up with. I would have recommended picking a biblical name, something that will sustain much better over a long period of time, because clearly Western civilization is going to set the standard for the rest of the world anyway. And if you want to be a true visionary, you pick the trajectory that makes the most sense, which is biblical text, and name your rocket programs after them and get away from the occult origins of NASA, as Jack Parsons started and many followed, much to the detriment of the program and its credibility. If you really want to have credibility, don't name your stuff after pagan rituals. Anyway, it's Rich Hoffman here. Share, subscribe, make tomorrow a better day. If you ever read my book, The Gunfighter's Guide to Business, I think you'll love it. And if there's one thing that you always want to do is learn from history so you don't repeat the same mistakes. And from what I know of history, we're still repeating the same stupid mistakes because we didn't learn our lessons the first time. And that's because a lot of people don't want to draw a line in the sand and declare the behavior immoral because they don't want to get called bad names by the secular society. But if that portion of society is not happy with you, then you deserve a lot of credit because you're doing good for the purpose of good and fighting against those evil entities that plague in the background and haunt society at many different levels in ways that lead to eventual destruction. And if you really want to fight the root of that, you do so by calling it what it is. Anyway, have a good day. See you later.
Thank you for listening.